Hello. Thank you for joining me once again. I'm reading The Children of the Law of One in the Lost Teachings of Atlantis by Jon Peniel. This is an awesome book, so much so that I felt that I should read it rather than just recommend it, because most people, even when you recommend a book, 9 times out of 10, they don't pick it up, or they may, even if they pick it up, they may or may not read it. So I decided to do my part and read the book because I feel like it has such important spiritual information regarding consciousness and subconsciousness and the oneness of the universal will and the universe and everything that it entails, our history of where and how we came to be, as well as meditation and energy techniques. Okay, so pick up the book, read it for yourself. If not, thank you for taking the time to listening to me read it. And even though reading is not my first go-to, that's why this makes this even more special for me, because I really am truly enjoying the process. So we are in chapter 7 on page 81, and we'll start from recent developments from the beginning. The following is from a scroll that was a later addendum to the translation of the previous story, the above story. But what is particularly interesting about it is that it is said to be written by the same author, the being who was also Grand Master Thought, but in a different lifetime. That same being was also known as Joseph, the son of Jacob, or Jesus in certain later incarnations. As it is symbolized in this image, the yin and yang circle, the focuses of dark and light, while in the opposition, are in movement with the one, in balance. This is the proper state of things in the universe. On the earth plane, however, the forces of dark and light are not functioning in this way. They are not in harmony with the one. Those of the darkness predominate greatly and attempt to eliminate the light. They battle endlessly with love and peace and on one side, hate and violence on the other. Balance is not there, but balance you can create. Such is universal law, the law of one, and it ultimately prevails. Some in the future will claim that since it is all one, there is no right or wrong, no good or evil. But even though there is an element of truth, we are all one anyway, and thus none of this really matters. There is an important consideration. The lack of consciousness by some does create suffering and does create disharmony vibrations within the one. When you are suffering, do you not want a remedy? Do you not want help to stop it? If you are suffering needlessly because of the illusion, good, evil, right, or wrong, would you not want to have this pointed out and have assistance in finding a remedy? Thus, is not the remedy good? Is it not right? Do you not care about the suffering of your brothers and sisters? As you have just heard, in days long gone by, Atlantis was split between the followers of darkness and followers of light. Those who followed the way of the light were known to themselves and other Atlanteans as children of the law of one, as it roughly translates. From the beginning, the darkness was on the rise in Atlantis, and finally, as you just heard, the repercussions of this came upon us. How? Transgressions against the law of one, fixed universal principles, laws of the way it is and against those of the earth's nature, which is in harmony with the law of one, were everywhere. Great harm was done to the earth by the followers of darkness. Natural imbalances were created by them. A pillar of the law of one is that of cause and effect. Thus did these actions bring about the physical fall of Atlantis. The greatest of these natural imbalances were created by drilling holes in the Earth's crust, down to the levels of molten Earth. The Belialians used the very gross physical forces of the inner Earth to generate their power. They use concentrated light energy beams, author's note, like lasers, to bore great holes in the earth. Remnants of them can still be seen in many places, author's note, notably such as Florida, the Caribbean, and the Blue Hole of Belize. Creating their power plants was much like making a series of unnatural volcanoes, and it resulted in great instability and seismic disturbances. Even though they were warned of these consequences, the Belialians persisted in this unnatural activity until it caused the earth changes that destroyed Atlantis and the Belialians of that time. Before the final destruction of Atlantis, knowing the time, knowing the signs, those of us of the light went to many other parts of the earth in order to continue our work. As time went on, branches of the tree were created. And as some of the other people of the earth learned from us the way of the law of one, branches of the earth sprang forth. Most of us still known spiritual traditions and religions of the world have descended from us, though many are hardly recognizable from their origins. They are relatives, close or distant. Still, much confusion has risen. Some of these have become so distant and far from their beginnings that they are really instrument of the darkness now, while others have remained relatively true to their source and still serve the light. As was said earlier, during the exodus from Atlantis, many of us followed thought, pronounced thought, T-O-T-H, Thoth, was that Thoth? To the land of Kim, K-H-E-M, now called Egypt. There he built the Great Pyramid and other temples and places of healing for the purposes of completing our work, initiating the wise and enlightening the ignorant. The work of freeing the humanimals was continued there. Modern science has surmised that these great pyramids were built by workers over many, many years for the purpose of tombs. However, lacking any real facts from that time, these scientists make great assumptions, and their conclusions were truly unscientific. These great structures were in fact built by Thoth, using forces he controlled with the help of advanced technology aboard his terrestrial airships. Author's note, a common Atlantean mode of transportation in the days of Atlantis. These vibratory forces could change molecular density so that the great stones could be made to float in air, just as wood floats on water. The power generating plants built by the children were very harmonious with nature. in stark contrast with the Belialian methods. The generators were simple pyramids that harmlessly collected the energy present in the Earth's aura, a frequency of electromagnetic field, the field that makes a compass point north. The power generator pyramids used only crystal and copper capstones combined with a large peak release collector, a capacitor, inside the pyramid. This allowed wireless transmissions of the power to any building or vehicle, including the airborne terrestrial ships such as thoughts. Forgive me if I'm mispronouncing that. The Great Pyramid itself was both a power generator. More about it can be found in the chapter on metaphysics. And a center for central stage spiritual initiation for the children of the Law of One. Its a great hall was once lined with the painted tablets depicting the stages of spiritual development and initiation that were later to become the major arcana of the tarot. The humanimals were treated in other pyramids. The various places of healing and consciousness raising that were built in that area. They were released from enough bondage there so that they were at least capable of finding their own freedom, their own way back to the One. But now, it is not only many of the reincarnations of the humanimals that were lost to the One, there are many, many more, even some of those who helped save the humanimals. Thought's ship remains, hidden under the Sphinx. This may yet be found and used by initiates when it is time and the need arises. Between the Sphinx and the pyramid is buried a chamber that contains the records of our history from the beginning to the year 2001, known as Hall of Records. This, or the duplicate of the records in the Yucatan or the oceans, will be found just prior to the great earth changes that will again rock the earth on its axis. Refer to author's note on page 86. Eventually, our work in Egypt complete, we left for places of retreat to create centers of refuge for the children. This was done so that the light would survive, even as darkness continued to grow in the world. It was also known that if our numbers remained at least 1,000, that the needs of those seeking light on earth would always be met. Master Thought, aware of ever-growing darkness that was to be known, and knowing how the written word can be controlled and corrupted by the greedy and the power mongers, put the keys of knowledge of the spiritual initiate's path back to the One into the images on cards. As mentioned earlier, these were the first tarot cards, which were replicas of the images that lined the great hallways of the Great Pyramid of initiation. Thought knew the images would be more difficult to change by the corrupt and more difficult for them to understand. He also knew that those on the path of ascension towards the One would someday see the understanding their meanings and secrets. To further ensure the safety of these keys, he added more cards to the major arcanum, creating the full system of deviation. The method of deviation he taught to the land of Egypt who were leaving Egypt for other lands. Author's note, wandering Egyptians, that would later be known as gypsies. Knowing that these Egyptians would use their deviation system to reveal the future of others for profit, he knew that greed itself would ensure that the Egyptians would preserve the images as much as possible, and that the knowledge would be preserved in many different lands. We then left Egypt and went to many lands, including those known at the time as Oz, and the remnants of Mu. Author's note, what are now Tibet, Europe, and parts of the Americas and Asia, etc. Other Atlanteans who had not come to Egypt had already gone to other lands, some being of the one, some being of Belial. Some in the new lands were called the children of the one gods, or the Great Light Brotherhood, or Great White Brotherhood. Others became known as magi, magicians, and alchemists. Many of the children used legends and guises to keep the politically powerful from interfering with them and their strange ways. Ignorant rulers were only too happy to let the alchemists pursue their wield practices, so long as it could result in discovering a means to make the ruler rich by changing common metal to gold. Still, others of the children were known as great spiritual teachers, thinkers, and creators in various forms of art. Many brought forth communities and monasteries to further the work of the One. In these places, the teachings of the One lived on in pure form and expanded, spreading to eventually become the foundations of other divergent philosophies and spiritual paths. A branch of the Magi formed communities around the 5th century BC, eventually to become known as the Essenes. The purpose of this community was specific: to live a strict spiritual life, as pure and disciplined as possible, in order to create offspring generations that would be of a higher consciousness, in order to provide the ultimate physical vehicles for the final incarnations of the beings that was Master Thoughts and his soulmates. This latter incarnation became known as Jesus in the male. That same being had more than 24 incarnations, being the one in Atlantis, which became the basis of the story of Adam and Eve, which was told in the sacred scriptures of several religions. More about that in a later chapter. He appears in other places in scriptures also, but the last physical appearance was as Jesus in what became known as the New Testament, which he actually wrote much of himself, although much has been tampered with. He now exists on greater planes in a way we cannot understand with our earthly brain. End of addendum. Back to more recent information related to by me from my own experiences and those of other adepts and true teachers. New current events. There was one community of Atlanteans who didn't live on Atlantis during the Great Destruction, living in total isolation from the outside world until a few decades ago. These people remain of the pure genetic line of Atlantis. I won't get into that here for a couple of reasons. It's not permitted, it's not permeant to the goal of this book, and it is far more too involved to cover properly here. Having a body that is of the pure genetic line of Atlantis is fascinating, but not really important. A body is just a physical vehicle. Adept monks and initiates of the children of the Law of One, even though not genetically Atlantean children of the Law of One, are still of the pure line of totally keeping with the Law of One via spirit and universal consciousness. That is what really matters. The present times and the prophecies. A dark deception. Some people have recently been fooled by the falling of political divisions and apparent changes in the form of government around the world, thinking that it is leading us to a new age of peace and oneness. But take care, for this is but a grand illusion perpetrated by the Dark Ones, and the outward appearances of beginning of what is really the final attempt to take over the world by forces of darkness. The new age of peace and oneness cannot be achieved by governments. And while this age of enlightenment is close, it is not here yet. So beware. A false, negative new age is at your door. Prophecies from many diverse cultures all over the world occur that we will first need to deal with the darkness coming in the full power, the Antichrist, so to speak, and a powerful system of anti-light before there is an age of peace, harmony, and Christ consciousness. The prophecies of the children predict this also, but go a step further by stating that it is upon us now and starting to snowball. This you are seeing the beginning of, and you shall see in full face in the very near future. We are about to see tyranny, oppression, and control, enslavement on a scale that is unprecedented. A helping hand will be offered to a collapsing world, an economically desperate world, a crime-ridden world, a hand that will welcome you and take care of you and make you a servant for the dark side if you grasp it. In recent years, Tibet has systematically raped thousands upon thousands of Buddhist monasteries have been deliberately destroyed. Loving beings of the light have been tortured and killed. The destruction of the Tibetan culture and the people is well underway. The world has not acted to stop these obvious horrors. It's not even covered by the media. Why? The continuing decay of the Earth's eco and biological system brings global catastrophe rapidly closer in a myriad of ways. Yet, the world governments don't put an immediate halt to the many known causes of this encroaching global disaster. Hate crimes and strange crimes by children are on the rise throughout the world. Obviously, something is very wrong, and the variety of popular ideas and approaching to deal with it just make for a greater show. while things continue to get worse. There are no solutions other than spiritual. Most people believe that there actually are various political sides with totally different approaches opposing each other. But if there are really political differences, why is the outcome always the same? Either unenlightened, basically selfish people are in control, or they are not. It just varies to the degrees of selfishness and thus the degree of darkness. The reality is that things are way beyond there being any political solutions. There are no military solutions either. But there are solutions. We can change ourselves to become someone who is not contributing to the evils. And we can find our inner freedoms, inner salvation, which automatically make us part of the solution. It is said that it is always darkest before dawn. The time of darkness is great once again. Most of those from Atlantis are back again. And the same selfish mistakes are being made again. The last days of Atlantis are with us once more. And thus is suppression of the light, positivity, and the expansion of darkness, negative polarity, negativity. The following story is just one indication of this. Every May, the children of the Law of One participate in a group meditation called Wesak. It's pronounced Wesak. Initiates of the Law of One all enter a deep trance-like meditation, which brings us closer together and into the light, into the higher realms within the universal spirit. There are several reasons for it. For one, it is a momentary break from the constant pain and sorrow of having to live in physical bodies in this world of suffering and lost souls. Wesak was once the closest we came to getting a vacation getaway. The Wesak meditation lasts for days, and we begun and ended on and off at various times. The meditation is also a powerful commune that experienced simultaneously by the children of the Law of One around the world, regardless of where they are. Wesak meditations create an emotional, mental, and spiritual link that renews and bonds us all. We share energy, feelings, and information, and temporarily merge as one being with many facets. In order to achieve this, the meditations are so deep that we leave our physical bodies and join in astral or spiritual realms. It was always a joyful celebration, a time of sharing with a degree of intimacy and love that most of you cannot understand at this time. These days, it is also a time of sadness. In 1990, during Wesak, we were set upon by what could be called modern agents of the sons of Belial. On one night of the Wesak, hit teams struck and murdered teachers of our order. It was planned and executed with precision timing, simultaneously on an international level. We were all defenseless at the time because of being in a deep trance-like Wesak meditation. Hundreds were murdered throughout the world. Some of us survived only because we had alert elders or novice monks nearby. We were able to fend off the attackers, and that dark night was just the beginning of occasional attacks that continue to this day. This had never happened before, but those who served the darkness had actually become so blindly self-centered they were ignoring implications of karmic law, cause and effect, having crossed the line and broken what might be called ancient universal rules of engagement. A new era of physical, psychological, and psychic attacks began. Even our isolated monastery in Tibet was to be targeted. Some of you are aware of the thousands of Buddhist monasteries that have been attacked, destroyed, and used as target practice for the military. But the attack of our monastery was far different and not conducted by military forces you might expect. More on that later. During Wesak, even greater numbers of us were gathered there. The monastery and all who were there, including Gabriel, were physically obliterated by military forces using state-of-the-art high-tech weapons. All who were gathered there for Wesak were lost to us on the physical plane. There are few survivors around the world now, far less than 1,000. Those of us who remain are few, and there is also so much each can do, and it is not over. Author's note. This was a very sad event, but I am sometimes dismayed that some readers can express more regret that the monastery and the library were destroyed than regretting that the monks and teachers who were there were killed. Please remember that even though the monastery was a remarkably unique and ancient, it was just a place, just buildings. The greatest loss was that of those who were caretakers of your souls, those who made the monastery what it was, those who were the life and soul of the monastery, those without whom it wouldn't have been a monastery. We keep hearing from people saying, wasn't anything saved from the library? No, and yes. Like the destruction of the library at Alexandria, the destruction of our library was a great loss. But how great a loss compared to the loss of the teachers. The loss was nothing in comparison. Let's say a great carpenter teaches all his skills, everything he knows, to his apprentice. And that apprentice becomes a great carpenter who does the same, and on and on. What's more important, the master carpenter or the building he taught in, the master carpenter or the home improvement books he read when he was young. And if you really want to learn to become a great carpenter yourself, what can you learn best from? A great carpenter or a book about carpentry? Teachings are written in this book, but but they are living in enlightened teachers. So if you really want to become a great enlightened teacher, what can you best learn from? A great enlightened teacher or a book about how to be a teacher? And what is more important from learning, growing, and attaining spiritual wisdom and enlightenment? Ancient buildings that have no teachers, or a teacher who has no ancient buildings? Also, as I mentioned earlier, this is not an ancient archaeological book, nor is it about the monastery itself. The story of the monastery is inconsequential background. Let's use an analogy. Excuse me. Let's use an analogy. For a moment, think of the book as a stage for a play with a message. The message is more important than the play and what the playwright wants the audience to get. The play itself is less important. The stage and sets for various scenes are even less important. In fact, they are completely unimportant to the message. And the monastery is merely one of the sets. One set may be destroyed, but the play goes on delivering its message. We have already expressed that it doesn't matter to us whether or not anyone believes anything that happens to be in the book. Ancient history, Atlantis, Hall of Records, whatever, let alone the stage or sets involved. Once again, the book's sole purpose is to present teachings about spiritual realities of life and how you can personally change, get back to oneness with God, and have a positive effect on others and the world. Either those teachings make logical and intuitive sense and are considered valuable, important, or not. Next, some readers have asked how the monastery remained undiscovered even by Tibetans. Here are the reasons. First, to the Tibetans, the area was considered forbidden. They would not go there, and they wouldn't help anyone else who tried to go there. In fact, they would do what they could do to prevent it. Also, until the advent of the Chinese invasion, Tibet was closed to outsiders. Next, for explorers other than Tibetans, it was very difficult to get to and protected. It is documented that a few explorers tried to reach the areas via alternate routes in the last century, but stopped and turned back just before getting there. There is more than one reason for that, including hierarchical influence and force fields that weaken the body. But whether you believe in such things or not, the documented facts are that the explorers turned back every time. You can decide the reasons. Of course, the area is not protected now as it once was, but still it remains highly isolated and very difficult to get to. Finally, it was hidden from the view of satellites. Recently, a reader sent us a copy of a newspaper article about an amazing discovery. In the winter of '99, a year after this book was first published, explorers from National Geographic entered the general area of our monastery. They were the first non-children to ever do so, and considered it an amazing discovery. The headline read, "Shangri-La discovered. or something like that. Amongst other things, it described a lush subtropical valley amidst the Himalayas, so hidden by natural phenomenon that it never even showed up on spy satellite photos. See our website for details. They were also astounded by the flora and fauna, a paradise of trees, ferns, and legendary animals, all hidden away from civilization, according to them, and any previous human contact. You'd expect such a discovery would be getting pretty decent media coverage, wouldn't you? But what should have been the discovery of the century, or at least the decade, was barely getting any attention at all. In fact, the article was very difficult to find, and National Geographic didn't respond to our repeated inquiries. We thought it would be nice to have some pictures. Then recently, the National Geographic Explorers TV show aired a story about that expedition. But the story was cut off, so to speak, leaving it with the expedition only discovering the waterfalls nearby. Nothing was said about the big discovery of the lush subtropical valley. Why? I can only guess. Perhaps something was found that doesn't fit and would shake up the status quo. Or something even more serious. Or maybe they just thought the discovery would only bore those who watch the Discovery Channel and PBS. One reader also asked for the precise coordinates, so maybe scientific research teams could be sent to make an amazing discovery public. But perhaps some get benefit from it. Before I get into that, let me just mention that we prefer it not be made public because there are still monks in the area who would suffer severe adverse consequences as a result. But even putting that aside, such a scientific revelation would never happen. To start with, consider this one example. It's really one out of hundreds of examples, suppression of archaeological finds that don't fit the status quo. Edgar Cayce gave the specific location of the legendary Hall of Records in Egypt. Egypt is a free and far more easily accessible country compared to Tibet, both politically and geographically. Cayce literally pinpoints where the record chamber is located between the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx, which are right outside a major city. He even gave some specific directions on accessing the passage leading to the records through one of the paws of the Sphinx. Even with all these specifics available to allow Cayce's story to be proven or disproven, what difference has it made? What scientific research team have been able to discover or prove or disprove, for that matter, its existence, and with what result? Does the government of Egypt, let alone China, give permission for anyone to do whatever they want to try and find it? No. And as far for it being discovered, which it has been secretly, there's virtually no chance that the truth would ever make it to the public. In fact, I know a film producer, Star Wars, etc., who was in Egypt making a documentary about the mysteries of the Sphinx for a major television network. During the filming, They conducted above ground scanning for hidden chambers and found an underground chamber exactly where Casey said the Hall of Records was located. This man tried everything possible to have legitimate archaeological evacuations of the chamber started and made public. He concluded that getting them to give such permission was harder than getting the U.S. Treasury to let you have the keys to Fort Knox. Scientists run into the same wall, evidence or not. Even so, knowing the precise coordinates of any specific archaeological finds or ruins does not make for publicly revealed discovery. However, it can make serious problems for those involved, or in the area, like our monks. I don't believe that satisfying someone's curiosity, scientific or otherwise, is worth that in any case, but especially when it wouldn't do any good anyway. The archaeological community doesn't want any info out that rocks the boat, and our monastery falls into that category. They won't spread the news of such a discovery amongst the scientific community, and the media won't cover it either. But even more of an issue with our older monastery is that certain governmental forces don't want any evidence coming out regarding whose military forces were involved in destroying it. I can't say who because of the further problems it would cause, but I will tell you it wasn't Chinese. Again, the media won't touch the story even if someone brought them absolute proof of the ancient buildings and or evidence of who, how, why regarding the destruction. Another very important point I would like to make here. This book is in lieu of our making information available to the public from a secret record chamber buried in Egypt near the Sphinx. These are mentioned in the Casey readings and called the Hall of Records, so I refer to them by that name. Many people have misinterpreted the Casey readings to mean that the Hall of Records will be opened and revealed for the public. But close scrutiny and applied writings will show that they can only be opened by an initiate of the Law of One, and were put there by us for our own use at a later time in the future. If they were ever opened by us, we were then to decide what would be revealed to the public. Here's the scoop. At the time they were placed, we didn't know exactly how At the time they were placed there, we didn't know exactly how various free will choices would affect or change the future within certain bounds. We weren't sure to what extent, if any, those records could be excavated and or made public. Nor were we sure to what extent the lineage of our order would be preserved. But now the future is upon us. We are finally in the present times. And as we reach the period in which the discovery of the Hall of Records, and more importantly, its contents and message, could have been made public, we are faced with the reality of our times. Mainstream public revelations of such a discovery is very, very, very unlikely. It would discredit careers and upset the theories, beliefs of many people and organizations all over the world. On the other hand, public revelations of this message of the records via this book is a minor threat in comparison because many of the people won't buy the book in the first place, and many won't take it seriously even if they do. It would have been great to stun the world's citizenship with an archaeological find that presented the history, spiritual message, and teachings that were here in this book. Many more people would have heard about it, and the great public would have had to take it seriously. But that isn't going to happen because of the way things are in the world. The powers that be are not going to announce discovery of an archaeological proof of alternative theories of creation, prophecy, and teachings like those contained in this book or the Hall of Records, because it would radically change the status quo, our lives, and theirs. Yes, there is a slim chance this may still somehow slip out, but 1998 was the time for the revelation. That's why this book was released during 1998. Other than you directly accessing the records physically, this book is it. It reveals the essential contents and message of the Hall of Records in a condensed form. It basically covers the Hall of Records' essential prehistory of our species, the changes that have occurred and are yet to be upon us, the nature of God and the universe, our place in it all, and how to get free again, back to our spiritual angelic state and back to living in harmony and oneness with universal spirit. That last part is the most important. In fact, those keys to your spiritual nature and how to reclaim it are the reason for our existence as spiritual order and for this book. The records were not placed there to be discovered in the future as fascinating curiosities, nor archaeological artifacts, nor proof of Atlantis, or a library or monastery. So here is your alarm clock going off, your reminder about your true spiritual heritage, how to regain it, and at this time in history, the time of great changes is the beginning. This book fulfills that purpose and destiny. Those of you who truly have the eyes to see and ears to hear will recognize that and get what you need from it. Now, because of the assassinations of our teachers and destruction of the primary monastery, there is an overburdening problem with our ability to help all of those who need help to free themselves from their separate selves and return to oneness with God. There is a great need for a new wave of others to attain universal consciousness, so they can join us in helping their brothers and sisters. This is one of the reasons for this book. Much of what I'm writing here would never have been made public before, but because of the teacher shortage and the times of change that are upon the world, these writings are being released now. This is being done primarily to, number one, reach more of those who may have evolved to the point where they have normally come in contact with a teacher by now. Or number two, to pass on our heritage, your heritage, Number 3, reach the few of you stragglers who have ears to hear and who may be helped by it. We are doing this because the time is so short and resources so limited. As I said earlier, the cycle has come full circle, and the opposition and upheavals that plagued Atlantis long ago are beginning to visit Earth again. If you still have spiritual work to do on yourself, please hasten, for time is so very, very short. If you feel the need and have the desire to have personal help and guidance, then find a teacher now. Pray for guidance and help if you want it. If not, do what you must, but do it now. And when your self-work is complete, there is much for you to do. For many others need your help. But if you do not complete your self-work soon, it may be a very long time before you get a chance to continue. We are at the end of an age. At the time of we are at the end of an age, and the time of harvest is at hand. The earth is cleansing itself of the virus, human beings, that has infected her and made her ill. Even if you have changed so that you are not part of this disease, fever, shaking, and purging will not necessarily leave you unscathed. It is very difficult to reincarnate when there are very few physical vehicles or none for your spirit to enter. Even in the event of a new age of enlightened humans, you will be waiting in a long line. And, okay, let me back up. Even in the event of a new age of enlightened humans, you will be waiting in a long line. And if you don't become transcendent of your separate self before the coming tribulations are over, and you have not met the obligations of your karma before you leave your present body, you will be waiting in an undesirable, unpleasant state of existence for a very, very long time before your opportunity again exists. But if you live with, as the Buddhists say, right mindfulness, you can achieve total freedom and paradise. It's all up to you. Ask yourself the following question and really give it some thought. What kind of world would you like? What kind of world do you want to live in? Would you like to live in a world full of kind, caring people, of peace, harmony, and creativity? You can, but you must be the kind of being who would naturally inhabit such a world. As I said, the earth is presently in a most disharmonious condition. Ask yourself why the world is this way. If you trace any problem to its root, you will find that it is the result of the selfishness that is the natural outcome of separate consciousness rather than shared consciousness. The selfish-based thought and actions of all kinds, hate, war, starvation, greed, poverty, torture, etc., are not unusual freak events. They are just the day-to-day norm. And it gets worse daily. If you don't like these things, identify the real enemy. The enemy is the selfishness spawned by separateness. Is within each of us. We cannot change anyone but ourselves. If we want to make a change in all this, that's the only place to begin. Surrender to the universal one, to God. Get back to universal consciousness any way you can, as quickly as you can. The selfish motivates, the selfish motives that drive negative, destructive activities on earth could not exist if the people were of one consciousness, one with each other and the universe itself. Yet, it does exist. And now the effects of the small-minded human actions on nature itself have created a ponderous imbalance in the earth. The earth and the universe itself, in restoring the balance, will soon produce changes that will result in great devastation to all life, including human life. It has already begun. Nature is causing great changes. Extinction of species is skyrocketing. New plagues have already arrived. For both human and other life forms, starvation and homelessness is on the rise. Why? Humans have been disease-causing parasite to this planet and its other life forms. What do our own bodies do when infected? We get chills, raised temperature, shaking, vomiting, and bowel excavations, all done to increase eliminations of toxins and to create an environment that will kill infection associated with germs. Entire species, multiple species of plant and animal life are becoming extinct on this planet daily, directly due to this infection by humans. The earth is a being and is reaching similarly to the way our bodies react to an infection. Can you not already see the first signs? Increases and decreases in temperature in different areas of the land and oceans. The cute name El Nino is just one of many such effects. Extreme flooding here and extreme drought there. More and more eruptions and shakings. What is beginning to take place is not unlike what our own bodies do to heal themselves of disease. Open your eyes, if they are not already opened. Back during my conversation with Gabriel so long ago, after he told me of all these things that would someday come to pass, many of which now have actually come to pass, I asked him an important question. So, how can we live in such a paradoxical world? We can do this by shedding ourselves of what makes us part of the selfish, destructive world. This is achieved by displacing the selfish part of us that contributes to the darkness, overthrowing it from our personal throne of command and replacing it with the part of ourselves that is giving, caring, kind, harmless. Let the inner one reign as king of our actions and thoughts. Create yourselves anew, a being incapable of harm, and live a life of unselfish love. All is vibration, including your consciousness. It is universal law that vibration will seek and find its own level. Remember our conversation about how oil and vinegar are of different molecular vibrations, different natures. As oil will always go to oil, vinegar will always go to vinegar. Even if they are broken up and mixed for a time, so too, whatever your vibration of consciousness is, you will end up in that vibratory plane of existence. You will end up where you belong, with who you belong with, only by virtue of what you are. What you make yourself to be will determine your destination. Where your heart is, so shall you be also. Build your nest where you want to live. If you live a life of unselfish love, how can it be any other way but for you to join the others who have already done this and live with them in a world of love and light? If you live a selfish life, if you live a selfish life, who will have you amongst them? Only those of your like kind. In order to travel, to go anywhere, one must let go of where they are and where they have been, or they cannot go anywhere. To continue going on requires continuously letting go of where you are. Going onward in consciousness into love and light requires letting go of the negative self, of selfishness. Yes, the death and rebirth of the negative separate self may be painful. Oftentimes, growth accompanied by pain. But this is everyone's price for the ticket to paradise. It was more than worth it to me. Is it worth it to you? Okay, that is the end of chapter 7. How exciting. The children of the law of one. I would have to say thus far, that was my favorite chapter. The Children of the Law of One and the Lost Teachings of Atlantis by Jon Peniel. Please pick this book up for yourself. Read it, reread it, contemplate it, share it, practice it. Most importantly, just be it. Okay? Decide for yourself. Thank you for joining me. I am beyond grateful, and I am grateful that I have done my part for this to reach to whom it needs to reach. Okay? So, until the next time, we will be on chapter 8, and we'll be starting on page 92. And the chapter is love. Let's see what it has to say.